Tears of the Legion. Marcus Antonius Crispus could not believe he still drew breath. The Romans, his brothers, had won, or so the surviving tribune claimed. But the victory was an ugly, hollow thing. Over half their legion had perished in a swirling torrent of blood and mud, leaving bodies strewn across the rolling hills where the enemy had dug in. The few Romans still on their feet dragged themselves through the tangle of debris, dazed and sickened by the stench of death. The clang of crimson-stained armor echoed across the field as survivors picked their way among corpses. Some offered final prayers to the gods on behalf of their fallen comrades. Others were too weary to do more than trudge, silent, in search of anything that might still be useful. A shield less battered than their own, or a sword with its blade still intact. Marcus felt every bruise, every scab, every contusion in his body as he stumbled forward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His legion's standard lay broken somewhere far behind him. They had lost their eagle, the symbol of their honor, in the chaos of the fighting. When he thought of how many of his brethren had fallen, men he had drunk wine with, men who had confided in him about their sweethearts waiting back in Rome, his heart clenched. When had the proud Roman Empire come to this? He might have wept if he had any tears left to shed. "Marcus," someone called out from across the way. It was Flavius, a fellow legionnaire, still splattered with dried gore. Marcus gave him a feeble nod of acknowledgement and waved him off, indicating he was fine. He was far from it, but what was the point in admitting that? Their scouting party had a job to do: root out any survivors from the enemy side, secure what was left of the supplies, and check if the region was safe enough for the battered Roman forces to set up a makeshift camp. Hours pass as the remaining legionnaires paused near a low ridge overlooking what appeared to be their enemy's main encampment. Sparse tents stood tattered in the distance, some still smoldering, black pillars of smoke drifting into the hazy afternoon sky. The nauseating aroma of charred flesh reached them on a light breeze. "Stay together," barked the Decanus, the squad leader. "We've no idea if any of them remain alive." Marcus gave another nod, this time setting his jaw, and started forward with the group. Yet a shiver rippled down his spine. Something about that ruined camp drew him like a moth to flame. An uncanny whisper seemed to tickle at the corners of his consciousness. He had experienced the madness of the battlefield before, the illusions and echoes that come after a day of slaughter. But this felt different, sharper, more tangible. It was as if something, or someone, was calling him, his name flickering in inaudible murmurs on the wind. With each step, the strange pull grew stronger. When the others paused to inspect a half-torn tent, Marcus drifted away without so much as a word. A rotting wooden gate stood ajar at the edge of the camp, revealing a narrow pathway that snaked between spent campfires and collapsed barracks. He moved quietly, ignoring the pit in his stomach that insisted he turn back. He couldn't. The insistent whispers pushed him forward, compelling him deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Dust and ash swirled around him as he made his way between the ruined tents. He coughed, squinting through the smoky haze, and felt a sudden wave of nausea. The air was alive with tension, buzzing with an otherworldly presence that pressed on his temples. As he staggered forward, the faint moan of tortured hinges caught his ear. He stumbled into a clearing in the center of the encampment, where an iron cage stood in stark silhouette against the flames that still flickered in a nearby brazier. At first, he thought it was empty. A wave of relief washed over him. No survivors, no wounded enemy soldier to dispatch. But then, movement. Within the cage, lit from one side by the dying embers, sat a lone woman. Her posture was proud, regal even, despite her predicament. Her hair tumbled in dark, tangled waves around her face, but nothing could hide the beauty carved into her features. high cheekbones, emerald eyes that glimmered with an uncanny light, and lips set in silent defiance. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He approached the cage, his sword still in hand but held loosely. Something about her presence eclipsed the horrors around them, like a spell settling over the entire battlefield. Was he dreaming? The enchantment in the air seemed to press upon him even more as he neared. She gazed at him as though she had been expecting his arrival. A subtle, sly smile curved across her lips, and though she said not a word, Marcus sensed words forming in his mind, as though she had whispered them. "Release me." Almost without meaning to, he lifted his sword to inspect the lock on the cage door. His conscious mind tried to protest. "What are you doing? She's an enemy. Who knows why she was caged?" But the gentle pressure in his thoughts, that mesmerizing hush, silenced his better judgment. It took some effort, but he finally jammed his blade into the rusted lock and snapped it. The door creaked open. The woman remained perfectly still as he took a step back, clearing the way for her. A moment later, she rose and stepped forward. He was overwhelmed by her closeness, by the subtle scent of something sweet and floral beneath the smoky carnage. The mild brush of her hand across his armor ignited a shiver deep within him. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, time froze. Then the hush broke, replaced by a swirl of emotions in his mind, none of them his own. Before he fully understood what he was doing, he had offered her his cloak to shield her from the cold. She accepted it, and a faint, measured smile played on her lips. She thanked him in a voice that sounded like autumn leaves rustling, soft, mesmerizing. "Marcus!" Flavius and the others appeared at the edge of the clearing, alarm lacing their voices. They had followed the footprints and now saw their comrade standing with a woman they did not recognize, her face illuminated by the glow of dying embers. "What in Jupiter's name are you doing?" Flavius demanded. His gaze flicked toward the open cage. "Who is she?" Marcus found he had no adequate reply. He merely managed, "She was a prisoner." Flavius gestured angrily at the cage. "Yes, but why? She must be dangerous." The woman's eyes narrowed. Though she said nothing, something in that fleeting expression made the hairs on Marcus's arms stand on end. Yet in his confused daze, an odd protectiveness welled up inside him. He turned to Flavius. "She's unarmed, weak. We can't leave her here." Flavius stared incredulously. "We're in the middle of a war-torn region. The Legion is barely functioning. We can't afford to risk it." But their Decanus, stepping forward with a more measured gaze, cut in. "We'll bring her back. If we find her guilty of anything, she'll face the tribunals." Marcus did not notice the faint flicker of satisfaction that crossed the woman's face. He only saw the briefest softening in her eyes, an unsaid gratitude. His heart twisted with pity, or perhaps something else entirely, as he helped her shuffle along with the group. The next few weeks flashed by in a blur of logistical chaos. The battered remnants of the Legion regrouped, gathering fresh recruits from neighboring cities and awaiting orders from Rome. They were initially camped in a rough, hastily constructed fort near the battle site, but soon marched onward to a larger outpost closer to the heart of Roman civilization. Throughout the journey, the woman, whose name they learned was Ileana, remained a subject of both fascination and dread. Nearly every soldier had some suspicion about her. Rumors abounded. She was the daughter of a barbarian chief. She was a captured noblewoman from some unknown kingdom. She was an enemy spy. Despite it all, Ileana kept largely to herself. She spent her days quietly within the confines of the Legion's supply wagons, speaking only to Marcus. Whenever she did speak, her words were carefully chosen, each syllable carrying an undercurrent of mystery and power. Marcus found himself drawn to her, caught in the net of her presence. He lingered at her side whenever he could, bringing her food, fetching extra blankets, telling her modest snippets of Roman society, stories of the markets, the temples, and the great roads leading to the capital. She listened with an intensity that bordered on hunger. At times, Marcus's sense of reason would prickle. Why was he so eager to help her, to impress her? Why did her eyes glow with that uncanny emerald light in the moonlight? But those nagging thoughts melted each time she touched his hand, or looked at him with a gratefulness that made his stomach flutter. Soon they arrived in a bustling Roman city perched on a broad river, a hub of trade and commerce. The legion made camp just outside the city walls, though the mood remained grim. Repairing the army's strength and discipline after such a catastrophic battle would not be easy. Morale was low, supplies were tight. Officers bickered, and rumors of barbarian uprisings in distant provinces brewed anxiety. It was into this environment that Ileana stepped under Marcus's watchful eye. He had vouched for her, insisting she was harmless. The local authority, a seasoned tribune, agreed to give her a chance. She seemed too refined to be a common enemy combatant, and the tribune's curiosity was piqued by the strange circumstances of her capture. Ileana quickly charmed the city's denizens. She found work of a gentle sort, helping as a herbalist's assistant or weaving fine fabrics to sell at the market. Women gossiped about her exceptional beauty and rumored exotic heritage. Men either eyed her warily or swooned in her presence. Tales about her began to swirl, describing her as a wandering healer, a foreign noble, even an angelic figure who had saved Roman soldiers during the battle. Marcus was pleased to see her integrate so seamlessly, but he could not shake the sense of shadows gathering at the edges. Sometimes, at night, he would wake from strange dreams, blood running in the streets of Rome, the snap of bone, screams echoing through the hills, and see Ileana standing at his bedside, watching him with luminous eyes. Yet by morning, the memory felt vague and surreal, and the warmth of her smile cast doubt on any misgivings he possessed. One evening, after guard duty, he came to see her in the small rented room she occupied in the city. Candlelight flickered against the walls, and the sweet scent of burning herbs perfumed the air. Ileana welcomed him with soft affection, guiding him to a seat by the window. "How goes the Legion?" she asked, her voice low and lilting as she prepared tea from a mixture of pungent leaves. Marcus sighed, leaning forward. "Badly. The general is pressuring the tribune for fresh conscripts, but the city cannot supply more men without leaving itself defenseless. We're weakened after that last campaign. It may be months before we're back to full strength, if we ever recover at all." Ileana offered him a cup of steaming brew. He sipped, grimacing at its bitter taste. "I worry about the Empire," he confessed. "Not just this city or our legion, but for Rome itself. The men speak of troubles abroad, famine in the east, rebellions in the north." She placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You love your homeland, don't you?" He nodded. "Yes, though sometimes I wonder if the glory we once had is fading. There's so much corruption, so many internal feuds. Perhaps it's the will of the gods that we decline." A flicker passed through Ileana's eyes, like a spark catching tinder. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "If you could do something, anything, to save your people, your beloved Rome, would you do it?" Marcus's heart pounded. I suppose so," he said uncertainly. She held his gaze, her green eyes seeming to devour his thoughts. "Then trust me," she whispered. "Trust that I have a way to help. But first, I must be allowed greater freedoms. Introduce me to those who make decisions here, to the patricians and senators passing through the city. Let me learn how they govern." An unspoken anxiety gnawed at him, but under the weight of her gaze, it felt like an afterthought. He swallowed. "Of course, if it can help the Empire." Ileana smiled, a sweet, dangerous curve of her lips. Very good. That night, and many thereafter, Marcus dreamt of strange shapes swirling in darkness. He saw Ileana standing over a crowd, arms raised, conjuring flickers of greenish flame. He saw legionnaires turning on each other, their eyes vacant and glassy. And at the heart of it all, a single whisper that echoed through his mind. It begins. Over the following months, misfortunes piled upon the city, and across the distant provinces as well. Crops withered, struck by a sudden plague of locusts. Livestock fell ill with a sickness the local priest could not cure. The city dwellers found themselves blaming the provincial governor for negligence, and the provincial governor in turn blamed the legions for failing to protect trade routes from bandits. Civil unrest stirred like an angry beast beneath the veneer of daily life. Ileana, moving quietly behind the scenes, fanned every ember of tension. She attended lavish banquets, forging connections with the wealthy and the powerful. Her enthralling presence, her graceful carriage, her knowing smiles, won hearts and coaxed secrets from unsuspecting lips. More than once, Marcus overheard rumors that small cults of her admirers had formed in the city's underbelly, worshipping her as a goddess of rebirth and retribution. The Legion was slowly splintering from within. Some men swore by her supposed divine gifts. Others suspected her of witchcraft, cursing her name behind closed doors. Fights broke out, swords were drawn in anger, and the confusion only escalated. At the eye of the storm stood Marcus, bound in invisible chains of fascination and love. He had allowed her access to the city's high-born families, had spoken on her behalf to the tribune, had vouched for her when suspicion fell upon her. Some nights, he glimpsed the darkness behind her gaze, her inhuman serenity, her passionless dismissal of suffering, and was overcome by a creeping horror. And yet, the power of her enchantment remained too strong. As the city's chaos grew, a fresh wave of barbarians attacked distant Roman outposts. Messages poured in, demanding reinforcements. But the Legion was plagued by desertion and sabotage. Stores of wheat caught fire in mysterious circumstances, and disease spread through the cramped city. Wails of the sick began to echo through the streets. Through it all, Ileana glided like a silent shadow. Every so often, Marcus noticed her slip away at night, only to return at dawn. She would look exhausted, perhaps from the energies she expended in her unseen rituals. On more than one occasion, he spotted her in the city's temple district, murmuring cryptic phrases before neglected altars. Within weeks, the city was on the brink of collapse, and the messengers from Rome insisted the emperor was furious. If matters were not quickly resolved, an imperial legion would be dispatched to seize control, and there would be consequences. All around Marcus, friends turned against each other in suspicion and panic. Finally, the tribune, at his wits' end, decreed that the city's gates be temporarily sealed to prevent further spread of disease and panic. No one in or out without express permission. Rumors whispered that even the tribune suspected a supernatural cause behind the surge of misfortune, and that he was planning to confront Ileana directly. Marcus discovered this from Flavius, who cornered him in the courtyard of the Legion's barracks, glancing around to ensure no eavesdroppers. Flavius's eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights. "The tribune is calling a council," he whispered urgently. "I overheard the officers. They suspect that Ileana might be involved in all these calamities." Marcus stiffened. "That's absurd," he said automatically, though his heart hammered. She's just a woman who has tried to help. She's done nothing wrong." Flavius grimaced. "That's not what people say. They think she's cast a spell on you, turned you into her puppet." Marcus bristled, but he could not entirely deny how often he felt powerless around her. "I will protect her," he said, feeling a pang of desperation. She's innocent. Flavius's expression softened. Marcus, listen to me. You're my friend. I've known you for years. I see how you look at her, and I don't doubt she's bewitched you. You need to step away for your own sanity, or you'll be branded a traitor. Marcus glared, then turned on his heel and marched away. But a tremor of doubt gnawed at him, and he could not quell it. That evening, Marcus confronted Ileana in her chambers. The city outside was on the verge of a riot. Crowds had formed near the gates, demanding an escape from the disease-ridden streets. Torchlight flickered through the window, the glow of the city's distress. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "The people, our people, are dying. The Tribune suspects you're behind it. I need you to tell me the truth." Ileana looked at him with glittering emerald eyes. "Your people," she said slowly, "are reaping what they have sown." A cold fear seized him. "What do you mean?" She stepped close, her fingertips gliding across his chest plate. "Rome is a blight upon the world. You conquer, enslave, consume everything in your path. My homeland lies in ruin because of your legions, your unstoppable war machine. You saw how your own men died by the thousands. That was but a fraction of the suffering Rome has wrought across countless lands." Marcus swallowed hard. So you've been orchestrating the sickness, the famine." Her lips curved. "I have gifts, I have power, and I will see Rome brought to its knees. This city, this entire empire, will rot from the inside." His mind reeled. He realized with a horror that threatened to crush him that he had facilitated every step of her infiltration. A wave of revulsion, shame, and heartbreak crashed over him. He staggered away from her, pulling free of her enchanting aura for the first time. "You used me," he rasped, throat tightening. "All the kindness, all the warmth you showed. It was just a lie?" She shrugged with a cool indifference that cut deeper than any dagger. "Your feelings are your own. I merely guided them to suit my purposes." Marcus's heart pounded. He knew with sudden clarity that he had to stop her. But how? The very thought of harming her was like rending his own flesh. Yet the memory of his dying comrades, the haunting wails of the sick, burned in his thoughts. Through sheer force of will, he wrenched himself free of the intangible chains around his mind. With trembling hands, he reached for his gladius. Ileana's eyes flashed, and he felt the brush of her power, a cold force trying to stifle his movements. But he clung to the memory of his fallen brothers, of the Roman eagle they had lost in that disastrous battle, and summoned every shred of loyalty he had left. He managed to draw his sword. Ileana's demeanor changed from smug confidence to sudden alarm. Greenish sparks danced around her fingers, an unearthly glow intensifying in her gaze. "You dare," she hissed, her voice echoing with inhuman layers. Marcus lunged forward, tears welling in his eyes. He slashed wildly, hoping to land a single fatal blow. She raised her hand, unleashing a concussive force that nearly sent him to his knees, but he pushed past the pain, driving his blade toward her heart. The steel edge bit into her side. Crippling, she had twisted away at the last second, but deep enough to draw blood. She let out a keening shriek that reverberated through the room. It felt like shards of glass slicing through Marcus's skull. He staggered, momentarily blinded. When his vision cleared, he saw her kneeling on the floor, clutching her wounded side. A strange, dark fluid seeped between her fingers. Her face was a mask of fury and pain. All at once the door burst open, revealing a handful of Roman soldiers, centurions among them, who had finally come to act on the Tribune's suspicions. They took in the scene, Marcus standing with a bloody sword, Ileana injured and radiating unnatural power. Ileana rose, backing toward the window. Fury etched every line of her face, but fear now lurked behind her eyes. She uttered words in a language none of them understood, and the green sparks crackled around her like serpents. Marcus, panting, tried to raise his blade again, but she locked her blazing eyes on him and spoke one final wrathful incantation. Pain tore through his chest, burning as though his heart had been grabbed by an unseen hand and squeezed. His legs buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his sword clattering beside him. Dimly he heard the shout of his brethren charging forward. Ileana loosed another shriek, unleashing a wave of energy that knocked them back. In the swirl of confusion, she lurched to the window, the wound in her side leaking that strange black-red blood. With one last look at Marcus, equal parts rage, regret, and disappointment, she disappeared into the night. Marcus struggled to breathe. The centurion rushed to his side, calling for a medic. Darkness threatened the edges of his vision. He tasted blood, coughed weakly. As the numbness spread through his limbs, he gazed at the empty window and felt a keen sense of both relief and despair. She was gone, but not destroyed. "Marcus," someone said, their voice distant. "Hold on." The last thing he saw was the reflection of torchlight on the floor, dancing like flames over the blood he had spilled. Marcus Antonius Crispus, a proud, loyal son of Rome, lies fallen. Ileana's sorcery had ripped the life from him in a final merciless act. Soldiers found him sprawled in her chamber, his eyes still open in shock, a single tear glistening on his cheek. Some say his final breath was the name of the woman he had loved and hated in equal measure. The witch, bleeding from the mortal strike Marcus had landed, fled the city. By dawn's first light, she was long gone, her footprints dissolving into the wilderness. She left behind chaos, decimated legion ranks, a city in the throes of disease and starvation, and a public convinced that Rome's leadership had failed them. If she had not struck the fatal blow in person, she had succeeded in something far more insidious. She had weakened the empire's foundations, sowing mistrust and despair among its people. In the following weeks, neighboring regions learned of the city's plight, and unrest spread like wildfire. Provinces teetered on the brink of rebellion. Warlords seized the moment to expand their power, and the emperor wrestled with news of internal upheaval coming from every corner of his realm. Famine claimed more lives. Generals hoarded supplies for their loyal soldiers, while the civilian population starved. Tensions mounted further to near boiling point. There were rumors, unconfirmed but passionately believed, that the witch had been spotted on a distant shore, her wound barely healed by the dark arts she commanded. Some said she carried on her cursed mission with a band of exiled rebels, plotting new ways to strike at Roman hearts. Others whispered she had slipped into the capital itself under a new disguise, waiting for the opportune moment to deliver her final blow. Whatever the truth, Rome was changed forever. The memory of that terrible night, the legionnaire's final stand against an inhuman foe, became legend, recounted in hushed tones around campfires. Some told the tale as a cautionary reminder not to trust strangers found on the battlefield. Others used it to illustrate the empire's vulnerability to forces beyond mortal ken. But all who heard it, soldier or citizen, recognized the deeper lesson, that the mightiest empire can be undermined from within by the subtlest manipulations, the quietest whisper in a single man's ear. And so the witch's revenge continued to fester in the hearts of men, a slow rot that threatened to bring down the eternal city itself. And in the shadows where the city's torchlight did not reach, one could almost sense her presence, watchful, patient, and still thirsting for the empire's final collapse. The world moved on, but Rome would never be the same.